Oh man. Okay, well, let us get started. Since this webinar is being recorded, I'll do a quick introduction and then we'll be over to Alyssa. Okay, so hello everyone and welcome. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Mary. I'm the guide manager at Alpine Ascents, and I am so hyped about this webinar. I have so many questions about nutrition, so I'm equally as excited as you to be here. If you've ever finished a climb thinking, why did I bonk so hard? Why does everyone seem fine? And I'm basically like a dehydrated raisin. This webinar is for you. Nutrition is honestly one of the biggest performance levers we have in the mountains, and also one of the most misunderstood. Guides see it all the time. People training hard, buying all the right gear, and then accidentally underfueling their way into a really rough day. So we wanted to bring in someone who truly specializes in mountain athletes, not just general sports nutrition. Today's speaker is Alyssa Leib, a registered dietitian with Uphill Athlete, where she specializes in fueling mountain athletes for performance, recovery, and long-term health. Alyssa has a master's in human nutrition from Colorado State University, and she combines evidence-based research with real-world experience working directly with climbers, runners, and endurance athletes. What we especially appreciate about Alyssa's approach is that it's not just eat less, go lighter. It's about fueling well, staying strong, and building a healthy, sustainable relationship with food, so you can actually perform and feel good doing it. She also very much walks the walk. She summited Mount Kilimanjaro, through-hiked the John Muir Trail, and races everything from sprint events to ultras. So she knows what is up. A couple of housekeeping notes before we dive in. If you have any questions at all throughout the webinar, and I know you will because I already have like 10 written down, you can pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll circle back at the end for like a big Q&A. All right, grab a snack for research purposes, and I'll turn it over to Alyssa.
Thanks, Mary. That was awesome. Thanks everyone for being here, giving me a platform to talk about stuff that I think is interesting. I'm gonna kind of skip this because Mary just gave a really great background on me. But hi, hello, this is me. Climber, runner, baby mountaineer. I definitely don't do some of the gnarly stuff that you guys do, but I love being able to work with all of you who do. Nutrition is obviously a huge topic, and it's always hard to kind of distill it down into, an hour-long presentation. So what we're basically going to do today is I'm going to go over some basics of performance nutrition, and then we're going to talk about sort of how to apply that in two separate ways. So one of them being the training side, because the reality is that's the majority of the time that you spend is training. It's not the time that you're actually on the mountain. And then we are going to talk a little bit about how can we apply some of this nutrition stuff to the actual mountain expedition situation. And then yeah, we'll have time for Q&A. Obviously, I can't address everything, but I'm hoping that this gives a pretty good overview so that you can walk away from today with some actionable steps forward of how you can help to not feel like that dehydrated raisin that Mary was describing. So starting with our general overview of performance nutrition. What is performance nutrition? I think most of us probably know that it involves what we eat before, during, and after a workout. But the reality is that when we talk about performance nutrition, we have to also include what we eat on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's something that a lot of athletes maybe know in the back of their head, but are a little bit surprised to find or maybe a little bit resistant to. I work with so many athletes who come to me really stoked to talk about the snacks that they're going to bring on their climb. But then as soon as I ask them when the last time was that they ate a vegetable, they kind of get all quiet and don't really want to talk about it. If that's you, totally no judgment zone. Eating veggies is hard. So I just think, it's important to sort of start here and remind you that like what you eat on a day-to-day basis has an even bigger impact on how you feel during training and during your climbs than what you are eating during that training or during that climb specifically. I like to say that as an athlete, every single thing that you eat is either helping you to recover from a workout or helping you to prepare for a workout, or in a lot of cases, the reality is it's doing both, right? I just started a training block personally, and I know that I'm, doing some sort of exercise 6 days a week. And so that means when I finish my run on Tuesday, I need to eat well so that I can wake up on Monday and crush my cross training. So basically, it's not enough to focus just on what you're eating immediately around or during a training session if you want to maximize gains from nutrition. Since you are all here, this conversation, this question of why should you care about sports nutrition may not be quite as relevant, but I do want to kind of run through a couple of reasons why nutrition matters. So first of all, it helps you to improve performance, and this is true both in training and on climbs. I'm going to call some of you out here. Have any of you ever felt a long day in the mountains pretty quickly turn into a death march? Or, maybe you weren't able to hit the paces on your workout because you were exhausted or you were having GI issues. And I will raise my hand there. That's definitely happened to me before. This is one of the biggest places where nutrition can make a huge difference. Adequately fueling for an expedition day really can make the difference between a successful summit or not. Why else should we care? Prevent injury or recover faster from an injury. We know that failing to fuel enough or correctly increases injury risk, and sports nutrition can help you both reduce your risk of that injury or help you heal from one if you already have one. And this is true both for bone injuries, but also soft tissue injuries. If you are someone who finds that you're just pretty constantly trapped in this injury cycle of tendons and ligaments and all of those kinds of things, nutrition could be something to consider. Even if you're not injured, we all like to recover faster from workouts. So nutrition can help to speed up the recovery process so that you can get after it again sooner and so that you can push harder when your workout requires you to push harder. This one may not be a priority for you. I find it's kind of hit or miss in mountain athletes, but if you want to reduce your risk of injury and become a better athlete, you have to be strength training. I'll put that plug out there. And in order to effectively build muscle and strength, you need to be eating well. And then the last one I'll mention here today is just feeling better, right? I know that every single person on this call right now has a life outside of mountaineering, and we want you to be able to live that life too. So whether it's, having enough energy to play with your kids at the end of the day, or, just feeling like after your weekend long workout, you aren't just trapped, stuck to the couch all day. Like you can actually get up and do chores. Nutrition can help you do that. So this is a tool that I really like that just makes it really easy to visualize nutrition priorities as an outdoor athlete. So this is called the Athlete's Nutrition Pyramid. It works kind of like the the old food pyramid from like 15 years ago, or for anyone who's familiar with psychology principles, it's kind of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs situation. So basically how it works is the things at the bottom of our pyramid are going to be the most important things to prioritize. These are the things where if you have a limited amount of energy, you want to focus on things at the base of the pyramid. Importantly, if you skip these things at the bottom and jump straight up to the top here, you're just simply not going to see results. It doesn't matter how much creatine you take. If you're not eating enough calories, it basically doesn't matter. If you are taking that approach, you're going to risk injury, illness, and then relative energy deficiency in sport, which I'm going to talk a little bit about because I think it's very important. So I want to use this pyramid to sort of guide some of our conversation today so that we can, spend the time on the things that need to be spent time on. So at the base of our pyramid, we have this fancy thing called adequate energy intake. And basically what this means is that the most important thing you can do with your nutrition is make sure that you are eating enough calories. So the body uses energy, uses calories for a lot of different reasons. And this graphic sort of helps us to show what that can actually look like in our body. So the bottom part of this box here is our resting metabolic rate. This is the energy that our body needs just to exist. So breathing, metabolism, hormones, all of the things that we need to survive. RMR also includes some pretty minor movements. So this would be like rolling over in bed or getting up and walking to the bathroom. And this is going to depend a lot on things like body size, muscle mass, and individual metabolism. But in most people, our resting metabolic rate is about 1,200 to 2,000 calories plus or minus. So we can see like this is a pretty big box. Above our resting metabolic rate, we have this thing called NEAT, which is our non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is the calories you burn when you are moving about your life, but not intentionally exercising. So these would be things like walking around the grocery store, playing with your kids. If you have like a standing desk at work and you're burning extra calories from standing, that's all going to fall into our NEAT. And obviously, this is one that's going to vary a lot depending on what your lifestyle looks like. If you work in an office job, this is probably lower than if you have a more active job. But I think I set this box to be like 400 or 500 calories. Above that, thermic effect of food. This is really freaking cool. So your body actually uses energy to break down food into energy, which is kind of cool. So if you've ever heard that saying that celery has negative calories, that's basically what this is talking about. Like we use more calories to chew and digest and break down celery than that celery actually provides to us. Um, Thermic effect of food also is going to depend on what you're actually eating, but on average, it's about 10% of the total calories that you eat in a day. So if you eat 3,000 calories in a day, your body is going to use 300 of them just from chewing and digesting the food that you eat. So we don't have this energy available to then fuel our workouts. And then this white box at the very top, this is exercise activity thermogenesis. So these are the calories we burn during exercise. And I think when most of us think about burning calories, this is kind of what we have in mind. So I made this box to represent about 1,000 calories. So we can think of this as like a pretty big training day, right? This is probably like 2 or 3 hours of like pretty hard effort. Obviously, this bar is going to vary a lot from day to day, just depending on what your training looks like. But, I included this to be sort of a bigger training day so that we can, easily kind of look at this and still see that like the calories we need during exercise, that's actually still a pretty small amount of the total calories that our body needs overall in a day. So why am I telling you all of this? I am telling you this because there is a syndrome called relative energy deficiency in sport. And anyone who follows me on social media or has, ever talked to me has probably heard me talk about this because it is incredibly prevalent in mountain athletes. The best kind of research we have is a study that got published about 2 years ago in trail runners. And it found that almost half of trail runners are at risk for REDS. So that means it's very important to talk about because it is so common in the sports that we do. So, what is REDS? REDS is a syndrome. So, that means it's a group of symptoms that occur together that results from something called low energy availability, which is basically just a way of saying that you're not eating enough food to account for your training load. So, if we think back to that pyramid, the base of the pyramid is we got to eat enough calories. And the consequence of not eating enough calories could be REDS. So to go over a little bit of what these symptoms are, and I apologize that this is super blurry. I pulled this from the International Olympic Committee's consensus statement on REDS that got published in 2023. And I'll kind of talk you through what we see here. So the center of this wheel is our low energy availability, so not enough calories. And around the outside here, we see all of these different possible effects of REDS on our health. So to give you a few examples, impaired bone health and menstrual dysfunction, these are our two best studied things. So we often hear about, teenage athletes who lose their period. That's a sign of REDS. If you are getting stress fractures, that's a sign of REDS. But beyond those two things, we also have things that are a little more like non-specific, like they could be caused by a number of things. So these are things like depression or anxiety, gastrointestinal issues. So a lot of the time when I work with an athlete who is struggling with GI issues that may have been diagnosed as IBS. Often, when we correct that sort of underlying calorie deficiency, it corrects the GI problems. Some other things that we can see sometimes are high cholesterol or high blood sugar, which is really fascinating. I won't dive into that today, but something to think about. Poor sleep, other issues with cardiovascular health, and then decreased immunity. So if you notice that you're getting sick all the time, that could potentially be a sign. Now, obviously, a lot of these things, like I said, they're very non-specific. They could be caused by a number of things. But if you're kind of listening to me talk through this list and you're kind of going, that might be a sign that you might want to assess your nutrition a little bit and see if low energy availability of REDS could be the underlying cause. So we know that REDS can affect health, but the other piece of it is that REDS can also impact our training in a pretty serious way. So there have been a number of specific performance outcomes that have been studied, and these are shown here. So basically, we know that if you're not eating enough, in addition to all of those health-related things we just talked about, you're also not going to recover well from your workouts. your endurance and your strength are going to take a hit. You are going to have a decreased training response. So, what that means is you are nailing every single workout that your coach prescribes, and you're just not getting better. Like nothing feels easier. You're not getting faster. You're not getting stronger. And that could be a sign that your nutrition is kind of out of whack. So, all of that to say, I think we can all agree that REDS is something that we want to avoid. And that's why I just always love to start with this idea of eat enough calories. If you are not eating enough calories, I'm not going to say nothing else matters, but it doesn't matter quite as much. So, moving up a little bit on the pyramid is something called nutrient timing. So, there are two components to this. The first is consistency. So, making sure that you're not skipping meals. I usually recommend that athletes are eating every 2 to 4 hours throughout the day, which is pretty frequent, but that helps make sure that you are meeting your needs and providing your body with a consistent flow of energy, essentially. The other piece of nutrient timing includes our pre and our post workout snacks, which we'll talk about in the next section. Above nutrient timing, we have meal composition. So you can think of this as like macros or food groups if you're somebody who doesn't like to track every single thing that you eat forever. So, thinking about those food groups and our meal composition, this is a tool called the Athletes Performance Plates. It was developed by a team at the US Olympic Committee and is basically meant to sort of expand the former dietary guidelines for Americans prior to like 2 weeks ago into more of like an athlete population. And I love this tool because I think it's incredibly practical. Basically, what we have here is 3 plates based on what your training looks like. So easy, moderate, hard, these are somewhat subjective, but a good starting point is an easy day is like a rest day, maybe a dog walk, maybe like a 30-minute recovery run. A moderate day is going to be about an hour to an hour and a half-ish of activity, and then a hard day is going to be harder than that. And obviously, there's a lot of nuance here, but as a starting point, I think those are kind of the guidelines to go with. And as we move from easy to moderate to hard, what you'll notice is that the proportion of carbs increases while the proportion of fruits and veggies decrease. And the main reason for that is carbs are our muscles' preferred source of energy. So without carbs, we cannot efficiently move in the mountains. Why do our fruits and veggies drop off? It's not because they're not important, but if you have ever had the unfortunate experience of eating a salad and then going out for a run or a climb, you may have experienced some unpleasant GI symptoms. And truthfully, that is the main reason why our fruits and veggies are decreasing here. We want your GI tract to be okay. Fruits and veggies are also really high in fiber, which causes those GI issues, but it also makes us feel really full. So if you have to eat half a plate of carbs at dinner, but you fill up on a giant salad first, that might be a lot harder for you too. One other thing I'll add to this, fat is kind of missing from these plates. Doesn't mean we don't need fat. I just generally find that most people don't really need to work on getting in fat. Most people are sort of already doing it because it's in the foods that we're cooking. It's flavor for the foods. It's that salad dressing, the guacamole, the oil that you use to cook your veggies in. So this is, again, a very like basic overview, but if you're kind of like, well, how should I be eating? This is a great starting point. And then finally, we get to the top of our pyramid, which is supplements. I find that I always get a ton of questions on supplements. So I'm going to do a little bit of an overview. Depending on time, I may not go through all of the supplement slides I have, but I just want you to sort of get an understanding of the supplements that I tend to recommend and what we should be looking for when we are choosing supplements. So, here are 4 questions to ask yourself when you are assessing a supplement. The first one is, does it do something that I actually need? There are so many supplements out there that are marketed as increasing energy, for example, which sounds really great. But the reality is that if you're somebody who struggles to get 6 hours of sleep a night, really you should be focusing on the sleep. Taking that supplement is kind of putting a band-aid on the problem. And, even if it does work, you're still sort of ignoring that underlying issue, which is just simply not sleeping. And this is the case a lot of the time, often, especially with more of these like functional supplements that tell you like, oh, improve your energy, improve your mitochondrial function. Like these are usually things that you can get by modifying your diet or some other kind of lifestyle factor. Um, so our second question, is it safe? So in the US, the supplement industry is not regulated by the FDA in the way that food and medications are, which is really, really scary because what it means is that manufacturers can put whatever they want in that little bottle. They have zero obligation to tell you. And there have been a number of studies of kind of like third parties who go through and test supplements and basically look for like what is actually in these supplements. And they've found really high rates of cross contamination with anything from sawdust to pharmaceutical drugs to like actual recreational drugs, which is very scary. Um, Even if your supplement is clean and uncontaminated, it may also contain something that interacts with something you eat or medication that you take. So just because it's natural, and I see this a lot with herbal supplements, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. So, we definitely want to be doing our due diligence with supplements before just kind of choosing one because the claim sounds really good. Because again, like our supplement manufacturers are not actually required to disclose most of this stuff. Third question, is the supplement effective? And by that, I mean, have there been independent research studies conducted? So studies that are not funded by the manufacturer to support their claims. This is a funny example that I always like to use with this, but if anyone has seen Morton's bicarb system, I get like 300 emails from the feed every day advertising this to me, and it is fascinating. So sodium bicarbonate is, it's a supplement that can be used to essentially buffer lactate in our muscles. So when you have that like burning feeling when you're working out really hard, taking bicarb can help to buffer that out so that you can go a little bit further before the burning happens. Now, there is good research on that being an effective supplement. The problem is when you take bicarb, which is a really strong base, and you consume it and it goes into your stomach, which has a lot of acid, thinking back to our high school chemistry classes, acid plus base equals boom. Um, so there are a lot of GI issues that come from taking bicarb. Now, Morton has created this bicarb system that's supposed to help the bicarb bypass your stomach acid and just get into your small intestine where it can be absorbed and then help buffer lactate. There was a really interesting study that got funded and published by Morton, so the company that made the supplement last year. And they found that it was effective at buffering lactate. It was effective at, improving performance. And they also found that nobody in their sample had any GI issues from taking the product whatsoever. Now, a couple months ago, another study got published by an independent third party, and they also were looking at the same exact Morton bicarb system. And they found that about 50% of the sample had GI issues. So I think that's a really good example of like, just because you find one study that says that the supplement works or that it doesn't make you poop your pants, doesn't necessarily mean that that's true. And that's good information when you're evaluating any kind of research. Our final question, I won't spend a ton of time on this, but does the supplement fit my budget? I mean, the reality is the supplement industry has a lot of money and supplements are very pricey. And, is there something that you could do instead that would help you meet your need there? On the safety note, I always like to recommend that folks choose a supplement that has been third-party tested by a company that has gone in and said, hey, whatever this supplement company puts on the label, whatever it says is in that supplement, that's actually what it is. So these are some really common third-party supplement testers that you'll see. If you are someone who, and I don't know, this is probably like a very small minority of you, but if you are somebody who might be getting drug tested from competition or anything like that, I would recommend choosing one of these two in the middle because these are also certified to not contain any kind of WADA or USADA banned substances too. Another thing I'll add, just because you see this label on a supplement, it doesn't say anything about the effectiveness of the supplement. It just says, hey, there's nothing sketchy in there. If that bottle says it's creatine, it's creatine. So with all of that said, there are a million supplements out there. Which ones do I recommend? And again, if you are not meeting your needs lower on the pyramid, ignore everything that I say right here. This is not an all-inclusive list, but these are some of the ones that I more commonly will recommend. Um, the first is anything that's medically or nutritionally indicated. So if you have a vitamin D deficiency and your healthcare provider determines that taking a supplement is the best treatment option, do that. But beyond that, you can kind of see the list here. I think I'm going to jump through and just talk about a couple of them. The first is protein powder. This one is probably the best researched of the supplements out there. And pretty much as long as you choose one that's been third-party tested, it is safe and effective. I always encourage athletes to work on increasing food sources of protein before turning to a protein powder, but I also recommend that protein needs can be really hard to meet. And one serving daily of protein powder or other supplement can be a really easy way to kind of bridge that gap. So with protein powders, whey is considered kind of the gold standard, but soy, pea, and plant-based blends also work really well. Quick note, BCAAs and collagen, these are not complete proteins. So these are not things that you would want to take as a sort of general protein supplement. I don't recommend taking BCAAs at all, by the way. That's just a waste of your money. Creatine. I always get a lot of questions about creatine. Beyond protein powder, this is probably the best research supplement out there. Creatine can help to improve strength, power, and recovery. There's some evidence that at higher doses, there are some mental or cognitive benefits to creatine as well. But basically, like, how does it work? Our bodies produce some creatine and we get it in some protein or foods, so like meat. For vegetarians and vegans, you are probably not getting a ton of creatine in your diet, so a supplement may actually be more effective for you. Um, one thing to note is that as creatine gets stored in our muscles, it does cause a little bit of water weight gain. So it's not uncommon to see, about 2 to 4 pounds of weight gain after about a month of taking creatine. General recommendation, take creatine monohydrate about 3 to 5 grams per day and take it right before or right after exercise. I think I'm going to jump through the rest of these supplements, but like caffeine is effective. Don't take too much. Um, let's see. Yeah, if anyone has other questions about specific supplements, happy to answer those in the Q&A. But just in the interest of time, I want to go through just some general recommendations for fueling our training and our expeditions. So our goal of fueling before activity is mostly just to top off your fuel tank so that you have energy for your workout. This is especially true for those who exercise in the morning. If you haven't eaten since dinner the night before, you got to have fuel in the tank in order to do things. So feel free to take a picture of this if it's helpful. But basically, if you have less than an hour before you're going to exercise, you want to aim for, this says 60 to 90 grams of carbs. I would say you can go as low as like 30 if you are a smaller individual. But it takes some trial and error just to kind of figure out what your body will actually tolerate. So, pre-workout morning banana might be enough for you. You may find that you need 2 bananas. A banana is about 30 grams of carbs. If you are eating several hours before you're going to start your workout, then I would encourage you to think a little more about the performance plates, and aim for more of like that hard day plate, so you can basically tolerate a little more protein and a little bit more fiber if you have a couple of hours to digest. And I definitely recommend this option before a longer mountain day, because if you're just eating carbs the whole day, you're not going to feel great. You want to have some protein in the system. So fueling during activity provides a couple of purposes. So number one, it provides a continuous source of carbs to your muscles that can be broken down into energy. Number two, it helps maintain your blood sugar to prevent bonking. Our body can store carbs, but when we use them up, we hit the wall, and that is never fun. And then our third reason, and this one I think is especially important during training, is eating during your workouts helps to promote recovery, because your body doesn't have to break down things like muscle tissue as an energy source. So when do we need to fuel? I recommend every workout you do that's longer than an hour, you are eating during it. So, 65-minute workout, you're eating. How much fuel? If your workout or your climb or whatever it is that you're doing lasts between 1 and 3 hours, we want to shoot for about 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour. If you're going to be out there for longer than 3 hours, that carb recommendation bumps up to 60 to 90 grams per hour. We're seeing elite trail runners and cyclists are hitting 120, 150 grams per hour. That's not necessary for most people. But on those longer days, we also see this protein recommendation jump in. And again, the main reason for that is if you eat candy and nothing but candy for 10 hours, you're going to feel really terrible. You're going to want to have something in your stomach. So protein digests more slowly. So we want to make sure that we're having a little bit of protein kind of spread throughout the day. How do we meet these carb and protein needs? There is a whole world of fuel sources out there. I truly encourage you to just like take a wander through your local grocery store or look through your pantry and just see what looks interesting. I've got a few examples up here. We've got our more kind of sports products over here on the left. So these would be things like gels, chews, sports drinks. Stroop waffles are a really popular one. And then over here are more of our kind of like whole food like snack options that you could just find at most grocery stores. If you are relatively new to fueling during exercise, these applesauce pouches are really great. They tend to be pretty easily digested, and they are readily available at most grocery stores. So that can be a really easy option. But yeah, you can see I've got candy. I know somebody put in the chat earlier that Nerds gummy clusters are their go-to. I know that's been really popular. I am personally team Nerds rope. I think that is better. But I digress. I have athletes who, they fuel well with sandwiches. They fuel well with pastries. I love a good trip to a coffee shop beforehand. So truly the world is your oyster. And the key is that you are experimenting with different fuel sources in training so that by the time your big climb comes around, you have it dialed. You know exactly what's going to work for you. So what about hydration? I could do a full presentation just on this alone, but the sparks notes of it are that hydration needs are highly individual, and they are based on individual sweat rate. So how much are you actually sweating? And then sodium concentration. So how salty is your sweat? And there are huge ranges of both of these things, which makes it really hard to come up with any kind of general recommendation. I'm thinking about a particular athlete I work with who has gotten her sweat tested, and she loses 2,000 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. And during the summer, she's losing about 1.5 liters per hour. So you can see how that pretty quickly adds up to be a ton of sodium and a ton of fluid that she has to take in. As a very general starting point, aim for about 0.5 liter of fluid per hour and about 400 to 800 milligrams of sodium per liter. So it doesn't have to be like electrolytes in your bottle. If you eat salty foods, that sodium all kind of counts, but this is kind of a general recommendation to keep you well hydrated. And then you can use your urine color as kind of the best way to gauge your hydration status. So our goal is pale yellow. We probably want to be peeing every 2 to 4-ish hours. Excuse me. Again, it's very individualized. But if you're finding that you have clear pee and you're going, every hour, you are probably overhydrated. You got to take a step back, maybe add in some sodium there too. Obviously, if your urine is a very dark yellow color, you are dehydrated. If your urine is brown, you need to evacuate and get medical help pretty immediately. There are, I guess, just as a plug, there are ways that you can get your sweat tested if you're curious about this. I don't think this is necessary for the majority of people, but let me know if anyone has questions about this. And I'm definitely happy to talk more about this at the end. I'm like such a nerd when it comes to sweat science. I think it's super cool. So that gets us to post-exercise fueling. And I like to think of this as the 3 R's of recovery. So our goals with recovery nutrition are number one, to rehydrate. So we want to drink fluid to make up for what we're losing in sweat. Number two, we want to replenish our glycogen stores, our carb stores in our muscles that have gotten used up. So we do that by eating carbs. And then number three, we want to repair our muscles. So that is with protein. The best way to do this is time your workout so that you can eat a balanced meal following the performance plates afterwards. I know that doesn't always work in everyone's schedule, and Mary and I were talking about this before we started the webinar. But I generally recommend if it's going to be longer than about an hour to an hour and a half before you can get that meal, that's when you want to start thinking of just sort of having something smaller to help kickstart that recovery process. So I think this is a great opportunity for something like a protein shake, but making sure that it's one that does include carbs. And if it isn't, pairing carbs with it. So protein shake and banana could potentially meet your needs there, depending on how many carbs are in that protein shake. So we know how to fuel while we're training. How do we apply some of these things to a mountain slash expedition situation? Because there are some unique considerations when you're on a mountain that you may not experience during training. So number one is altitude. There are a number of physiological changes that happen to our body as we move up in elevation. So one of them, our metabolism increases, which means we need more calories. We also see a lot of muscle atrophy as well as fat loss for extended trips at altitude. So with this, we really want to avoid losing weight as much as possible because it helps to conserve your muscles. All of that said, our body does metabolize more carbs for energy relative to fat. Basically, there's a couple of reasons for this. One of them is that when there's less oxygen in the air, we're not able to undergo the same kind of like aerobic metabolism that we would otherwise. So the reality of this is you got to make sure that you're getting plenty of carbs in to make sure that your body has the energy that it needs. Hydration, the higher you are, the more fluids you lose through breath and urine. So the more you need to drink in order to stay hydrated. This kind of gets compounded because at altitude, your thirst cues are less reliable. And this is especially true if it's cold. So you may need to be a little more mechanical about your drinking and have a hydration strategy. So maybe it is, okay, every 15 minutes, I'm going to take 5 sips of water. And you're kind of like mathing it out that way. I will say if you are somewhere where you're taking Diamox, this is particularly true. Diamox is a diuretic. It will dehydrate you incredibly fast. Iron status matters a lot at altitude. So iron, one of the many things it does in our body is it helps us transport oxygen throughout our body to our muscles and everywhere else. So when there's less oxygen in the air, we want our oxygen transporting cells to be really efficient. If you have a trip planned to high elevation, especially if it is a longer trip, I recommend getting your iron levels checked a couple months before. It can take, depending on how low your iron is, it can take 3 months or even longer to restore iron levels if you are deficient. So get on that before it's too late. Kind of two other things I'll mention quickly. High altitude causes something called oxidative stress, basically just a fancy way of saying things are breaking down in your body. So it may be beneficial to eat lots of fruits and veggies, which are really high in antioxidants to help kind of combat that oxidative stress. This isn't something that's been really researched in this situation, but just sort of mechanically, like logistically, we kind of understand how that would work. And then the other thing I'll mention is that GI issues at altitude are not uncommon. So these could include nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, bloating, and slowed digestion. And these are all things that can affect your willingness and your ability to eat to meet your nutritional needs. So the best thing you can do here is be prepared. Know that this might happen and have a plan. Maybe that means, okay, on summit day, I know that I'm not going to be feeling very good. So I'm going to prioritize liquid calories. I'm going to drink a lot of that blue Gatorade in order to make sure that I'm able to meet my nutrition needs more easily. I'm going to skip through this slide. Basically, the gist of it is there's been some research on supplements that may help to reduce acute mountain sickness, but none of them have really kind of like come out the way that we want them to be. So there's not really much that we can say about this yet, but maybe there will be more research in the future. When it's cold outside, a couple of other kind of physiological changes I want to mention. Your body needs more energy when it's cold. So again, we need more calories. Make sure that we're accounting for this. It can be a lot easier to fall behind on your fueling when your body needs more calories. And then again, when it's cold outside, we don't have great hydration cues. So it's a lot harder to stay hydrated. If you can, it can be really nice to pack some kind of warm beverage in a thermos with you, just because that can be a little more exciting to drink when it's cold outside. And then there's, of course, a bunch of logistical challenges, water freezes, food freezes. If you're not sure that if your food is going to freeze, put it in the freezer and see what happens. If it does, you can still bring it, but I just recommend having kind of a rotation where you keep food in an inside jacket pocket close to your body. Maybe have like 3 snacks there so that they can stay unfrozen. And then every time you eat one, take one from an outside pocket and put it back in that inside pocket so that it can thaw and you always have access to food. And then obviously the logistical challenge of if it's cold outside, you don't want to take your gloves off to eat if you don't have to. So, maybe you are pre-opening packages ahead of time. I really like the strategy of just putting a bunch of stuff in a Ziploc bag that I can just kind of like with my mittens pull open and kind of like pour into my mouth. And then I think just a couple of other considerations on a guided expedition in particular. So, well, and then the first one is sort of relevant to everybody, but like do your best to avoid digging yourself into too deep of a hole. It is much easier to stay ahead than it is to get back ahead and catch up once you've fallen behind with your fueling. Um, if you are going with a guide, get clear on what your guides are providing and what you need to bring. So, are you responsible for packing your own snacks, or will these be provided? If you have any dietary restrictions, are your guides able to accommodate them? Can you ask for examples of common meals? I find a lot of the time, just because of the logistical challenges of cooking on a mountain, dinners can be like rice and potatoes, which is great, but we also want protein for recovery, right? So if that's the case, maybe you need to bring some protein powder to supplement your dinner. Um, if you are traveling to another country, do some research on what foods might be available for purchase. Foods that are ubiquitous here may not be in your destination country. So thinking about the athlete I mentioned at the beginning from Switzerland who couldn't find Rice Krispie treats in her home country. I had a similar situation trying to find peanut butter in Patagonia. So do research ahead of time so that you can have some idea of what you're going to get. Um, Before we dive into a Q&A, just want to share my contact info here. Feel free to shoot me an email, follow me on Instagram. And if anyone is interested in a little more one-on-one support, I've got a couple of ways to do that through Uphill Athlete. Best way to learn more is uphillathlete.com/nutrition. And you've got, again, my contact info. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about anything. So I'll stop sharing. Mary, how do we want to do questions?
Oh, I can read them for you. So just sit back and let the questions wash over you.
I'm here for
Um, okay. First one, how can one approach nutrition for someone who does intermittent fasting often and usually eats one meal later in the day? Trying to shove food at the start of a hike in the morning makes me want to barf. What do you recommend?
sweeping recommendation is I generally don't recommend intermittent fasting for athletes, just because I find it is very difficult to meet nutrition needs. That said, I totally get that just kind of barfy feeling from eating early in the morning. Your gut is an organ that can be trained. So if you do not feel good eating now, by being very gradual, making tiny baby steps, you can get to a point where your body feels better and is able to digest that fuel early in the morning. So start really small. Liquids are going to be easier tolerated. So maybe if you can get down a couple sips of Gatorade before your morning workout or your hike, great. That's going to be, better than going in fueled. And this is something like the fasted training. I know I didn't really touch on, but I do feel really strongly about this. And I'll also plug Uphill Athlete has an incredible the former dietitian Rebecca Dent wrote a phenomenal article about fasted training and why it isn't recommended anymore. And I'm happy to share that with you, Mary, if you want to send it out
Oh
later.
yeah, I can.
But basically like fasted training doesn't really help with performance and it does increase your risk of injury. And a lot of that is because of the hormones that our body produces when we're in a fasted versus a fed state. So if all you can get down is a few sips of Gatorade, even that is going to help shift that kind of hormonal picture that our body is in to kind of shift you away from that like breaking down kind of injury forward situation and into something where you're going to be less likely to get injured. So all that to say, I would recommend trying to eat before your workouts, even though it's hard. And that does look like the article.
Okay, nice. Okay, second question. What healthy carbs do you recommend for most normal at-home meals and on the trail?
Hmm. Yeah, we didn't get into this too much, but when we think about carbs, there are simple carbs and complex carbs. So simple carbs are the ones that are going to digest more quickly. So these are going to be your nerds clusters and other, sugar-based things. Complex carbs digest more slowly. So these tend to be more like whole grains, certain like starches, potatoes, winter squash, those kinds of things. And you can kind of think of it as kind of like that separation. So like on the trail, you're going to want to prioritize those simple carbs because they do digest more quickly. Your body's going to get access to more energy fast. When you're at home, choosing more of those kind of whole grains, more complex carbs. So these are going to be things like, our rices, quinoa, barley, all of our fun ancient grains, corn. What other whole grains am I thinking of? They all exist. You guys know.
Barley. I don't know.
Barley, barley. I love barley. Yeah, that's a great one. And there's nuance to this. So, for example, if you're carb loading, let's say, those whole grains, that fiber is going to fill you up really quickly and make it a lot harder to meet your needs with a carb load. So, even though you're technically at home, you may need to prioritize more of those simple carbs, in order to kind of meet your needs there. Kind of same thing goes for like the night before a long run or a big climb. You may find that, the white pasta sits a lot better the next day than like the quinoa does. So all very individual.
Nice. Also sweet potatoes. I love sweet potatoes. Wait, those count, right? Yes, vegetable and a carb. Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Yep,
not a
that's a
big
good
fan.
complex carb.
Okay, next question. As a former unhealthy overweight person who has worked super hard to become an athlete, how do you overcome the mental guilt of eating carbs when society continues to push limiting carbs and calories? So that's like part one of the question. And in part two of the question, if leptin is low, is that a sign of not fueling enough?
Hmm. These are great questions. Number one, I hear you. Diet culture sucks. I could definitely talk about this, but I wanna validate that concern because I think it can be really challenging to eat as an athlete living in a culture that kind of demonizes all of the foods that we need a lot of. And that is definitely something that a lot of the athletes I work with really have a lot of trouble with too. Gosh, how to approach that? I mean, I think, the biggest kind of like general piece of advice I have there is like keep reminding yourself that, your needs are different than, the sedentary person. Your needs are different than they were, before you went through your health journey, right? And so you need to fuel your here and now body, rather than, eat in a way that like the average person who doesn't climb mountains is eating. Um, Answer to the second question, yes, low leptin can potentially be an indicator of low energy stores. Hormones are interesting because there are, a million and one reasons why they could look one way or another. I actually recently learned that low leptin is also a side effect of taking certain SSRIs, which is super interesting. But yeah, I think, if leptin is low and you're, kind of noticing other symptoms from that like wheel graphic that we talked about for relative energy deficiency in sport, I think those would all be potential yellow flags.
Okay, coming up next. So your presentation was amazing. Does everything that you have discussed apply if you're training mostly in zone one or two, or only above zone two, or is it independent of heart rate zone? So I guess, yeah, does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah.
you just, yeah.
That's a great question. So I would say generally yes. There are going to be some differences. So if you're spending a lot of time in zone one, even if you're out for 6 hours, you may not need 90 grams of carbs an hour. You may need more like 60. So there's definitely a little bit of like nuance to it. But yeah, at basically independent of how intense our exercise is, our body is always using some combination of carbs and fat as fuel. And the more intense we get, the higher the proportion of carbs that we're burning is, but we're still, even at zone 1, we're still burning, you know, probably 30% of our fuel from carbs. So if you don't have those coming in, you're not going to feel very good. It's a really great question because there's definitely a lot of nuance to nutrition that's hard to squeeze into an hour.
All right. Okay, we have a question in the chat. Is there a preference for type of food during activity? Carbs, fats, protein, sugar. I heard that sugar can spike up blood sugar levels. I'm not sure if that helps or makes it worse.
Yeah, so carbs are going to be the preferred fuel source during activity for sure. So when you are sedentary and you eat carbs, well, really all the time. So when you eat carbs, it gets digested. If you're on an empty stomach and you're just eating like sugar, it takes about 15 minutes for that to get fully digested and then for that sugar to end up in your bloodstream. If you're sitting at your desk, we don't necessarily want that because your body doesn't really need that sugar in, you know, that quantity all at once. But when you're exercising, we actually do need that. And so our muscles when during exercise are going to take all of that sugar out of your bloodstream pretty immediately and start converting it into energy. So technically there's a blood sugar spike, but it's actually useful and kind of desirable when we're exercising compared with when we're just sitting at home.
Nice. Makes perfect sense. Okay, we have a super fun question coming up next. Alyssa, what are your top 3 favorite healthy dinners for recovery and repair?
Ooh, oh, this is a really hard question because, like, completely transparently, I kind of suck at like eating at home. I find it really challenging. I'm also a vegetarian, so I'll say my favorite go-to if I have a little bit of time is we just call it baked veggies, which is like it sounds super lame, but I'll make like a big sheet pan of you know, different veggies and roast those. And then I will usually cook up tempeh. I'm a vegetarian, so tempeh is kind of like my like favorite protein source. I'll cook that up in a pot or in a pan with a little bit of soy sauce for flavor, and then have that with some sort of grain. I'm a rice fan, but sometimes I'll mix it up and use quinoa or something else. And then, kind of depending on what I'm feeling, I might do like hummus and feta cheese and pumpkin seeds on top if I'm really fancy. Or, you know, I might do more of like a Mexican cheese and like salsa kind of situation, depending on what I'm feeling. So I really like that because when we think about the performance plates, it's really easy to kind of modify that way. So that's one. Gosh, last night I made box mac and cheese with roasted broccoli. So I don't know, I don't know if that's like the best example, but I guess maybe that is a good example because you can take whatever food you love and make small modifications, add some things to it, adjust proportions, and you can meet your needs. So that's not 3, but hopefully that's an inspiring takeaway.
No, that's great. I'm already hungry. We have a question from Dallas. Is there a science to fasted workouts? Does this help our bodies metabolize fat instead of sugar? Or is this non-science? Like, yeah. What's
Yes.
your thought on fasted workouts?
So I will definitely point you to, and I am just confirming, yes, the article that Mary shared in the chat, that is the one I was talking about by Rebecca Dunn. She does a very deep dive into answering this question. The short answer, and I also recorded a podcast episode about that with Alyssa Clark like a year and a half ago too. If you Google like Uphill Athlete podcast, Alyssa Leib fasted training, you'll be able to find it that way. But the kind of short of it all is like, yes, training fasted increases fat oxidation, but we don't see that actually converting into any sort of performance benefit. And we do see it converting into an increased injury risk. So my take and, you know, the kind of take of Uphill Athlete is that we don't recommend fasted training anymore. I know that was something that was previously recommended, but the science and the research is, you know, constantly evolving, and based on all of the lovely research that Rebecca does an incredible job of summarizing in that article, I think, you know, really I can't in good faith recommend it anymore. And that is the podcast episode. Thank you.
Perfect. It looks like we have no more questions, but I have 2 questions for you from my personal book of questions. I saw that collagen in the supplements had a question mark. What are your thoughts on collagen? What is the benefit? Is there a benefit?
Yeah, collagen is another one of those where, like, for every study you find that shows that it does have a benefit for joints or connective tissue, you can find another one that says it doesn't. So there's not really any like consistent logic to argue that, like, yes, it does help. The idea behind it, for those who don't know, is that collagen is a type of protein that we find in our joints and our tendons and our ligaments and our connective tissue. And so the idea being, well, if I eat collagen, then I can support my joint health. The reality is, when we eat collagen, when we eat any protein, when it goes through the digestive process, it gets broken down into individual amino acids. And then when those amino acids get absorbed into our body kind of decides how to use them. So if you eat collagen, but your body is like, well, actually, we really need to, build some hormones over there, then it's going to take those amino acids and go build those hormones, and it's not going to do anything for your joints. So basically, the best kind of take that we have is, for collagen to be effective, you want to make sure that you're eating enough total protein so that your body doesn't really need to like repurpose those amino acids. You want to take it before or after exercise, and you want to take it with a source of vitamin C, which basically helps to encourage your body to like rebuild it into the collagen protein inside of your body. It's one of those things where, like, for someone who is kind of like consistently injured, like, try it. It's not going to hurt you. It might be a waste of money, but like, if you've kind of tried everything, including looking at your overall diet, then like it doesn't hurt. I do sometimes recommend collagen for folks who have like major surgery, like ACL repair or like hip labrum or something like that, just because it's sort of like, let's just kind of throw some extra things at your body just in case. But we don't, again, have like great research indicating that that's super effective.
Ooh, thanks for that. Because I've been drinking collagen every day with my coffee, which has no vitamin C. I could make a change tomorrow. Thank you.
Orange juice.
Yes. Okay, we have another question that came up as you were explaining that, and thank you so much for answering my collagen question. As a vegetarian, what are your go-to snacks with protein for the trail? And also, thank you for today.
Excuse me, you're welcome. I am a big fan of the like roasted beans. So there's like a few brands that make them.
Mm.
Chickpeas are most common, but like there's a brand called Biena, Biena, that makes these like roasted chickpeas that are like dried and seasoned, and they're crunchy and they're delicious. I'm always excited to eat them. They're a great protein source. I will say, if your body is not super accustomed to fiber, that may not be the best option. So that's one that I love. I'm also like a sucker for peanut butter. So those like individual little peanut butter squeeze tubes can be really good. Again, that one's kind of high fat. So we want to be, a little bit mindful of that. For someone who has more of like a sensitive stomach and is trying to find protein sources that don't have the fiber or the fat. Truthfully, like, it's not the most exciting, but like protein powder can do the job. Recovery drinks, those are probably a better option because they tend to have carbs in them. But a lot of the brands that make like sports drinks will have some sort of like recovery product that also includes some carbs. So that can work really well in a pinch too.
Nice. We have two of the same questions. How do you dial in your electrolytes for training? Like, how do you know if you're doing too little, too much? How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, so it used to be that the answer was trial and error, which it's still kind of the answer. So the like TLDR of all of this is, we have research has spent a lot of effort trying to figure out how we can measure our sweat, but it hasn't spent as much time trying to figure out what do we actually do with that information once we have it. So a lot of dialing in electrolytes does come down to trial and error. You can make your trial and error a little bit more informed by taking a sweat test. So this is something where there's a couple of different options. There are ones where you can just like go into a lab and they'll just like measure your sweat there and tell you your sodium concentration. I don't love those just because there's a difference between like when we're sitting down versus when we're exercising, what our sweat actually looks like. So I prefer ones where you can actually be moving. One of the like more popular ones is called Levelin, Levelen, and they basically like mail you a kit and you like strap it onto your arm and you go exercise and then you mail it back to them and they tell you what your sweat looks like. I also love Gatorade makes these like single use sweat patches. This is the cheapest option. You can get four of them for 25 bucks. About one in four is a dud. So, buy four, plan to use three. And there's just a mobile app that you can download and you just stick this thing onto your forearm. Go for a run when you sweat, it kind of fills up these channels in this patch. And then you use your phone to scan the patch and it gives you like it's not a super precise, like it'll tell you like, oh, your sweat is 20 to 40 milligrams per ounce or something, so it's like a pretty big range, but it's fairly accurate. I have a tool called an H drop, which is basically like a reusable version of that, which like I got because I am a geek about these things and I think it's really interesting. But my data from the Gatorade patch and from my H drop are very similar. So you can kind of take that information, and once you know like your typical sodium concentration, then you would basically match what you're taking into that. So if you find out that your sweat has 500 milligrams of sodium per liter, then you would choose an electrolyte product that has 500 milligrams per liter of water. That's kind of like the best educated guess that we have at this point of how to do that.
Nice. Ah, fascinating. I had no idea. So like, yeah, you could like really dial it in.
Maybe next year if we do the webinar series again, I'll just talk about hydration because I could
Yes. Oh,
I
I'd
could
be
talk
psyched.
about for an hour.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think we answered all the questions. Alyssa, thank you so much for this informative webinar. It was so great. I know I left with 10 different things to implement in my life tomorrow, including not having collagen with my coffee anymore and switching it to orange juice.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, and yeah, really appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing to help your athletes and
Okay.
friends be well prepared for the mountains.
One final question from me to you. What is for lunch today after
Ooh,
this?
I had leftover mac and cheese before this, so not super interesting, but I'm gonna go for a run after this, so I wanted to keep it a little bit light.
Yum, sounds delicious. Well, thank you again, and until next time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.